In the late 19th century, America was on the brink of transformation. The Industrial Revolution had sparked unprecedented growth, and cities like Chicago were booming, with grand architectural feats rising against the skyline. But within this era of progress lurked a darkness few could have imagined. It was here, amidst the excitement of the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition, that one man, H. Holmes, built an empire of deceit and death. This is the story of America's first known serial killer, a man whose charming facade masked a chilling brutality. Herman Webster Mudgett, later known as H. Holmes, was born on May 16, 1861, in the small town of Gilmanton, New Hampshire. Raised in a strict and devoutly religious household, young Herman exhibited an unusual intellect from an early age. However, his curiosity took a dark turn. He became obsessed with death and the human body, often experimenting on small animals in secret. This macabre interest in anatomy and medicine followed Mudgett into adulthood. He attended the University of Michigan Medical School, where he excelled academically, but also began engaging in fraudulent activities. Using his knowledge of anatomy, Mudgett would steal cadavers, mutilate them, and then claim they were accident victims to collect on fraudulent insurance policies. This blend of cunning and cruelty would become a hallmark of his later crimes. After completing his medical degree, Mudgett adopted the alias Henry Howard Holmes, a name under which he would perpetrate his most notorious deeds. With a penchant for charm and manipulation, Holmes moved from town to town, defrauding people and leaving behind a trail of broken promises and death. By 1886, Holmes arrived in Chicago, a city ripe with opportunity and anonymity. He soon found employment at a local pharmacy in the Englewood neighborhood, but his ambition quickly outgrew his position. Through deceit and likely murder, Holmes acquired ownership of the pharmacy and the adjacent plot of land, where he would construct his most infamous creation, a 3-story building that the press would later dub the Murder Castle. The Murder Castle was no ordinary building. Holmes personally oversaw its construction, hiring and firing multiple contractors to ensure that no one fully understood its twisted design. The building was a labyrinth of hidden rooms, secret passages, soundproof chambers, and trapdoors. It was a place designed for one purpose: murder. In 1893, Chicago hosted the World's Columbian Exposition, drawing millions of visitors from around the globe. For Holmes, this was the perfect opportunity. He advertised his hotel as a convenient and affordable place to stay, particularly targeting young women who had come to the city seeking work or adventure. Many of these women would check in, but never check out. Once inside the murder castle, these victims would encounter horrors beyond comprehension. Some were asphyxiated in sealed rooms with gas jets. Others were trapped in airtight vaults to die slowly. Holmes's fascination with the human body extended beyond death. He conducted grotesque experiments on some of his victims, dismembering them and selling their skeletons to medical schools. Holmes's methods were methodical and detached, but his primary motivation was profit. He would strip his victims of their belongings, forge documents to gain control of their assets, and even dispose of their bodies in ways that turned a further profit. Yet, despite the increasing number of disappearances, Holmes's charm and the chaotic environment of the fair allowed him to evade suspicion. Holmes's downfall began not with his murders, but with a series of increasingly reckless financial schemes. His undoing came in 1894 when he involved himself in a complex insurance scam with his associate, Benjamin Pitezel. The plan was for Pitezel to fake his own death so Holmes could collect the insurance money. But in typical fashion, Holmes murdered Pitezel instead. To cover his tracks, Holmes then murdered 3 of Pitezel's children, leading investigators on a nationwide chase. His crimes began to unravel, and by November 1894, Holmes was arrested in Boston for insurance fraud. However, as investigators delved deeper, they uncovered the grisly reality of his crimes. The murder castle was a house of horrors. Investigators found rooms filled with surgical tables, torture devices, and vats of acid used to dispose of bodies. Holmes was eventually charged with multiple counts of murder, though the true number of his victims remains unknown to this day. Holmes's trial captivated the nation. He showed little remorse, even as he confessed to 27 murders, though it's believed he could have killed far more. On May 7, 1896, H. Holmes was executed by hanging in Philadelphia, ending the life of one of America's most notorious criminals. The story of H. Holmes did not end with his death. The legend of the murder castle has persisted for over a century, a grim reminder of the evil that can lurk behind a mask of civility. Although the building was eventually demolished, its legacy lives on in books, films, and the nightmares of those who hear its story. Holmes is often considered America's first serial killer, a title that underscores the unprecedented nature of his crimes. His ability to blend into society while committing unspeakable acts has fascinated criminologists and historians alike. He was a man who exploited the rapid changes of his time, urbanization, anonymity, and the allure of the big city to create a world where he could kill with impunity. As we look back on the life and crimes of H. Holmes, we are reminded of the darkness that can reside within the human soul. His story serves as a cautionary tale, a reminder that the face of evil is not always monstrous. Sometimes it is the face of a charming man offering a room for rent. In the shadow of England's Industrial Revolution, life was harsh, and death was an all too familiar visitor. Poverty, disease, and despair haunted the coal mining towns of northern England. Yet even in this grim landscape, one woman's actions stood out for their cold-blooded ruthlessness. Mary Ann Cotton, a nurse, mother, and widow several times over, wielded death as her weapon. With a bottle of arsenic and a chilling smile, she left a trail of victims across Victorian England. Today, we unravel the twisted tale of Britain's first known female serial killer. Mary Ann Robson was born in October 1832 in Low Moorsley, County Durham, into a world defined by hard labor and high mortality. Her father, Michael Robson, was a coal miner, part of a class that toiled long hours in dangerous conditions for meager pay. Her mother, Margaret Robson, was a resilient woman who worked tirelessly to keep the family afloat despite their dire circumstances. But Margaret's strength was tested when tragedy struck. At just 8 years old, Mary Ann experienced her first brush with death. Her father fell to his death in a mining accident, leaving the family destitute. His body was discovered at the bottom of a pit shaft, and the only way Margaret could identify him was by his checked shirt. The tragedy marked the beginning of a lifetime marred by loss, and for Mary Ann, a growing obsession with survival at any cost. Mary Ann's mother soon remarried, a union that reportedly caused friction between the young girl and her new stepfather. Eager to escape her constrained and unhappy home life, Mary Ann left at 16 to work as a domestic servant. It was during these formative years that she honed her ability to charm and manipulate that would later become her most dangerous weapons. In 1852, at the age of 20, Mary Ann married her first husband, William Mowbray, a miner like her father. The couple moved to Cornwall, where William found work, and Mary Ann began building a family. Over the next decade, Mary Ann gave birth to as many as 9 children, though records are unclear. What is indisputable is that only one child, Isabella, survived into adulthood. The rest succumbed to what doctors of the time called gastric fever, a vague diagnosis covering a range of symptoms from vomiting to severe diarrhea. While the death of children was tragically common in Victorian England, the frequency of these losses in Mary Ann's household raised no alarms at the time. Medical knowledge was limited, and diseases like typhoid, cholera, and dysentery were rampant, especially in poor mining communities. Mary Ann used this to her advantage, hiding her crimes in plain sight. When William himself died in 1865, reportedly from intestinal issues, Mary Ann collected a substantial life insurance payout, her first taste of profit from death. By now, Mary Ann's methods were becoming more deliberate. After William's death, she moved back to the northeast of England, where she soon met her second husband, George Ward. George, already in poor health, was a former patient at a hospital where Mary Ann worked as a nurse. Their marriage lasted less than a year. George died in 1866, and the cause of death was listed as, again, gastric fever. Mary Ann, now a widow for the second time, collected yet another insurance payout. Next came James Robinson, a shipwright who had recently lost his wife. James, left to care for several young children, hired Mary Ann as a housekeeper. But shortly after her arrival, tragedy struck. 3 of James's children died in quick succession, their symptoms eerily similar to Mary Ann's previous victims. Overcome with grief, James turned to Mary Ann for comfort, and the two were married in 1867. Their marriage, however, was far from happy. James began to notice unsettling patterns. He was a practical man, accustomed to managing his finances with care, and Mary Ann's spending habits quickly raised alarms. Money began disappearing from the household, and valuable items vanished, later found pawned in local shops. The final straw came when Mary Ann insisted on taking out life insurance policies, not just on James but also on their infant son. Her urgency and persistence unsettled him. One evening, James confronted Mary Ann with evidence of her theft. He had discovered pawn tickets hidden among her belongings, proving she had been selling household items behind his back. When he questioned her motives, Mary Ann's calm facade began to crack. Her explanations were evasive, her charm unable to pacify James's growing suspicions. James, determined to protect himself and his remaining child, demanded that Mary Ann leave his home. Realizing her deception had been uncovered, Mary Ann fled the household under the cover of darkness. She left behind her infant son, George, and James Robinson, both of whom survived, likely spared by James's intervention. Mary Ann's plans failed for the first time, but she remained unaffected. She disappeared into the streets, looking for her next opportunity. For James, her departure was a relief. He would later discover that he had narrowly escaped becoming another victim of Mary Ann. In 1870, Mary Ann married Frederick Cotton, her 4th husband. Frederick, a widower with 2 young sons, had recently lost his wife, and Mary Ann stepped in as a nurse to care for the grieving family. But the Cotton household would soon fall victim to Mary Ann's deadly touch. Within 2 years, Frederick, his sons, and even Mary Ann's own mother, who had come to live with the family, were all dead. Gastric fever was listed as the cause in each case, but Mary Ann profited handsomely from life insurance payouts. Mary Ann's downfall began with the death of Charles Cotton, Frederick's youngest son. A neighbor grew suspicious after noticing Mary Ann frequently purchasing arsenic, ostensibly for cleaning purposes. The local doctor, alarmed by the boy's symptoms, ordered an autopsy. The results were damning. Charles had been poisoned with arsenic. Mary Ann Cotton's arrest and trial became one of the most sensational cases of the era. Witnesses testified about her arsenic purchases, her suspicious behavior, and the string of deaths that followed her. In 1873, Mary Ann was convicted of the murder of Charles Cotton. While she was officially charged with only one murder, it is believed she was responsible for at least 21 deaths, including 3 husbands, several lovers, her own children, and even her mother. On March 24, 1873, Mary Ann Cotton was hanged, her crimes finally catching up to her. Yet questions lingered. How many lives had she truly claimed? And how had she evaded suspicion for so long? In an era when death was common and women were often underestimated, Mary Ann exploited the trust of those around her to commit unthinkable acts. Mary Ann Cotton's story is a reminder of how greed and cunning can corrupt the human soul. Her crimes exploited the vulnerabilities of Victorian society, leaving a legacy of fear that still resonates today. Thank you for joining me as we delved into the life of Britain's deadliest Black Widow. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. In 1827, the quiet village of Polstead, Suffolk, became the center of a mystery that quickly unsettled its close-knit community. Maria Marten vanished without warning, and her absence did not go unnoticed among neighbors accustomed to the rhythms of rural life. William Corder, her lover, claimed she'd eloped to the Isle of Wight, assuring everyone she was safe and well. But behind these reassurances, Maria's stepmother was haunted by vivid nightmares, visions of Maria's body buried beneath the red barn. Her stepmother's persistent visions would soon unmask a killer and ignite one of England's most notorious 19th century crime stories, all set against the backdrop of a seemingly tranquil village. Maria Marten came from a working-class family in the village of Polstead, Suffolk. Her father, Thomas Marten, was a mole catcher, a modest but respectable trade. The Marten family lived a simple life, relying on practical skills and local connections. Maria, though young and attractive, was well aware of the limitations placed on her by her social standing. She became known throughout Polstead, where her beauty was both admired and criticized in equal measure. By the time she was 23, Maria had borne 2 illegitimate children. One of these children was fathered by Thomas Corder, the brother of William Corder, the wealthy local farmer. The other child was fathered by Peter Mayhew, a man from a respectable landowning family in the area. Peter's sister was the landlady to whom the Corders paid rent, establishing a connection between the Mayhew and Corder families. The fact that one of Maria's children was fathered by Thomas Corder and the other by Peter Mayhew further complicated her situation, embroiling her in a scandal that reverberated through the village. In a society where a woman's reputation and respectability were directly tied to her marital status and the legitimacy of her children, Maria's circumstances left her vulnerable. The village of Polstead was small and conservative, and gossip spread quickly, casting a long shadow over Maria's life. Despite her charm, she was marked by social stigma, and her options for security and respectability were limited. William Corder, the son of a wealthy farmer, appeared to live a life of privilege in Polstead. His family's farm afforded them a certain respectability, but William himself was a man set apart by a persistent sense of unease that followed him wherever he went. Behind his outward respectability and charm was a man known for deceit and manipulation. His social standing allowed him to mask his true nature, but those who knew him well could see through the facade. Corder was a man of dubious morals, and his actions spoke louder than any charm. From a young age, William's reputation for cunning was already established. At school, he was nicknamed Foxy, a moniker that reflected not just his cleverness, but also his tendency to manipulate and deceive others. This was not a harmless trait. Even as a young man, William showed a willingness to cross boundaries that others would not. One of the earliest signs of his character was the unauthorized sale of his father's pigs. In a close-knit community like Polstead, where livestock represented both trust and livelihood, such an act was a serious betrayal. His father was forced to repay the money to the buyer, but the damage to William's reputation couldn't be easily undone. As he matured, his deceitful actions only grew more audacious. William later passed a forged check for £93, a significant sum at the time. These incidents were not isolated mistakes. They were part of a broader pattern of dishonesty and fraud. Corder had no qualms about using deceit as a tool to further his own interests, regardless of the cost to others. Corder's reputation as a ladies' man added another layer to his character. He was known for his charm with women, a charm that was not merely social, but carefully calculated. In a village like Polstead, where everyone knew each other's business, his ability to win trust and affection while concealing his true intentions made him all the more dangerous. His flirtations were not innocent. They were part of his manipulation, a means of securing the loyalty of those he could later exploit. This calculated charm and manipulation formed the core of Corder's interactions with Maria Marten. He promised to marry her, but his intentions were never sincere. His promises were merely a guise, to keep her close, to use her trust for his own advantage. His relationship with Maria, alongside his dealings with the other men in her life, his brother Thomas and the landowner Peter Mayhew, only deepened the web of deceit that surrounded him. To those around him, Corder was the epitome of respectability, but to Maria and others who crossed his path, he was a man of untrustworthy character, adept at hiding his true nature until it was too late. Maria's relationship with Corder began around March 1826. For Maria, the promise of a future with someone from a more established family may have offered hope for stability. The social pressures she faced, along with her personal circumstances, likely influenced her willingness to believe in Corder's assurances. But Corder's track record suggested he was not interested in a straightforward partnership. His interactions with Maria were shaped by the same tendencies that had defined his earlier behavior: manipulation, secrecy, and a willingness to deceive. As their relationship developed, the differences in their backgrounds and the community's expectations created a tension that neither could escape. Maria sought security and acceptance, while Corder seemed intent on maintaining control over the narrative, both with Maria and with those around them. The stage was set for a series of decisions that would have lasting consequences for both families. It was against this backdrop of mistrust, social pressure, and hidden motives that William Corder began to outline a plan for Maria. A plan that would center on the Red Barn and lead to events no one in Polstead could have anticipated. Maria Marten's disappearance began with a promise that would never be fulfilled. On May 18th, 1827, Maria dressed as William's groom and walked to the Red Barn, never to return. The arrangement had been for secrecy. Corder told Maria they would elope to Ipswich to marry, and insisted she tell no one, not even her family. The last sighting of Maria was her heading toward the barn, her future uncertain and unseen by those who cared for her. In the days that followed, Maria's absence was met with uncertainty in the Marten household. Her family had little information to act on, and William Corder quickly set about constructing a narrative to explain her disappearance. He sent a series of letters to the Martens, each crafted to reassure and mislead. For months, Corder's letters claiming she was well on the Isle of Wight kept her family at bay. Sometimes he wrote that Maria was unwell, other times that she was settling into her new life, or that a letter had been lost in the post. The details shifted, but the message remained the same. Maria was alive, married, and safe. These letters were effective. The Martens, receiving regular updates from Corder, hesitated to raise alarm or begin a search. The steady correspondence created the illusion of normalcy and bought Corder valuable time. The family's hope was sustained by his words, despite a growing sense of unease, as the months passed with no direct word from Maria herself. As the year wore on, the strain of Maria's absence deepened, especially for her stepmother, who was also named Anne Marten. The family's patience was tested by the lack of tangible evidence that Maria was safe. By spring 1828, nearly 11 months after Maria vanished, Anne began to experience recurring, vivid dreams. These were not fleeting or indistinct. They were detailed and persistent, always returning to the same grim vision. In these unsettling dreams, Anne saw Maria's body buried within the Red Barn. The visions were specific, often locating the remains in a particular storage bay inside the barn, the very place where Maria had last been seen. Anne's conviction grew with each dream. She became certain that these were not merely products of grief or imagination, but messages pointing to the truth of what had happened to her stepdaughter. Anne's insistence on the accuracy of her dreams was met with skepticism by those around her. In the early 19th century, dreams were not accepted as evidence, and many in Polstead attributed her experiences to the strain of loss and worry. Despite this, Anne's belief did not waver. The dreams recurred with such clarity and consistency that she felt compelled to act, even as others doubted her. The tension in the Marten household increased as Anne pressed her husband, Thomas, to investigate. She described the exact location within the Red Barn where she believed Maria was buried. For nearly a year, Corder's letters had been enough to hold off suspicion, but Anne's unwavering certainty finally overcame the family's hesitation. The specificity of her visions, combined with the absence of any word from Maria herself, forced the family to confront the possibility that something terrible had happened. The decision to search the Red Barn did not come easily. It was a step taken only after months of anxiety, uncertainty, and mounting pressure from Anne's dreams. The family weighed the doubts of neighbors and the risk of disturbing the community's peace. But Anne's conviction left little room for further delay. It was this combination of persistent deception by William Corder and the disturbing clarity of Anne Marten's dreams that brought the Marten family to a turning point. Their decision to search the barn would soon bring hidden truths to light, setting off a chain of events that would draw the attention of both local authorities and the wider public. On April 19th, 1828, Thomas Marten entered the Red Barn with a spade, guided by the persistent insistence of his wife Anne's dreams. He focused his search on the grain storage bay she had described. Breaking through the compacted earth, he soon discovered a sack buried beneath the floor. Inside were human remains. The body, though badly decomposed, was identified as Maria Marten through remnants of her hair, her clothing, and a missing tooth, details her family recognized immediately. Anne's persistent visions proved true when her husband unearthed Maria's remains. The scene inside the barn was grim. Authorities found Maria's body still clothed, the remains arranged in a way that suggested a hurried burial. Among the most significant evidence was a green handkerchief tied tightly around her neck. This handkerchief was later identified as belonging to William Corder. The presence of this item, along with the physical condition of the body, pointed to a violent end. The indictment against Corder would eventually specify that Maria had been strangled, shot with a pistol, and stabbed with a dagger. These details, combined with the evidence at the scene, left little doubt about the brutality of the attack. An inquest was held at the Cock Inn in Polstead. There, the remains were formally identified as Maria Marten's. The handkerchief, the state of the body, and the other personal effects found in the grave became central to the investigation. The focus of suspicion shifted immediately and intensely to William Corder, whose connection to Maria and his sudden disappearance from the village now appeared in a new, more sinister light. Meanwhile, in London, William Corder had tried to distance himself from his past in Polstead. He placed a matrimonial advertisement in the Times and other newspapers, seeking a wife. He received a large number of replies and eventually married Mary Moore. Together, they opened a girls' school in Brentford, with Corder presenting himself as a respectable schoolmaster. This attempt to build a new life was short-lived. Polstead Constable Ayres enlisted Bow Street officer James Lee to track down Corder. Their search led them to Everley Grove House, the boarding school Corder was running in Brentford. Leah surprised Corder at breakfast and placed him under arrest. The capture was swift and left little room for escape. A search of Corder's residence followed his apprehension. Investigators found a pair of pistols, one of which had reportedly been purchased on the day Maria disappeared. They also discovered letters addressed to Corder from a Mr. Gardner, which appeared to contain warnings about the crime in Polstead coming to light, and a passport issued by the French ambassador. These items suggested Corder may have been preparing to flee once again as the investigation closed in. The unearthing of Maria's body, and the evidence found with it, especially the green handkerchief, made a compelling case against William Corder. While Maria's family and the authorities in Suffolk were searching for answers, Corder had tried to reinvent himself in London. His arrest and the discovery of incriminating items in his possession ended any hope of escape. With William Corder now in custody and the evidence mounting, the community braced for a trial that promised to draw attention far beyond Polstead. The trial of William Corder began at Shire Hall in Bury St. Edmunds, August 7, 1828. Interest in the proceedings was intense, drawing crowds from across the region. The presiding judge warned about the effects of widespread pretrial publicity, but the public's fascination with the Red Barn case only grew as testimony unfolded. The prosecution's case relied on a combination of compelling witness testimony and physical evidence. Anne Marten described the events leading up to Maria's disappearance and recounted her recurring dreams that had pointed to the Red Barn. Her account was supported by Thomas Marten, who described the moment he uncovered his daughter's remains in the barn. George Marten testified that he had seen Corder with a loaded pistol before Maria vanished, and later with a pickaxe near the barn. These family testimonies established a timeline and context that placed Corder at the center of suspicion. A crucial piece of evidence was the green handkerchief found tied around Maria's neck, which was identified as belonging to William Corder. The prosecution argued that this, along with the circumstances of the burial and the items found at Corder's London residence, directly linked him to Maria's death. James Lee, the officer who arrested Corder, gave details about the capture and the discovery of pistols and a passport, suggesting Corder had been preparing to flee. The prosecution maintained that Corder had no intention of marrying Maria, and that her knowledge of his past crimes, including a forged check, may have given her leverage over him. Corder's defense was brief. He admitted to being in the Red Barn with Maria on the day she died, but claimed that during an argument, Maria shot herself with his pistol. He insisted that her death was a tragic accident and denied any intent to harm her. Corder appealed to the jury for understanding, but did not provide an alternative explanation for the evidence against him, including the handkerchief and the hurried burial. The jury deliberated for only 35 minutes before returning a verdict of guilty. The sentence was death by hanging. After his conviction, Corder spent several days in prison. Following days of pressure from his wife, the prison chaplain, and the governor, he ultimately provided a written confession. In his statement, Corder admitted to killing Maria Marten, but maintained that the shooting was accidental and happened during a struggle. He denied stabbing her, as had been suggested during the trial. The confession did not alter the outcome, but it provided a final account of the events from Corder's perspective. On August 11, 1828, William Corder was executed in Bury St. Edmunds. The execution drew a massive crowd, with thousands gathering to witness the event. Before the hanging, Corder publicly acknowledged his guilt and accepted his sentence. After the execution, his body was taken to Shire Hall, where crowds filed past his exposed body. The following day, his corpse was dissected before an audience of medical students and physicians, a practice intended as both punishment and deterrent. The Red Barn trial became a matter of public obsession, not only for the details of the crime and the dramatic confessions, but also for the way it exposed the intersection of personal betrayal, community suspicion, and sensational justice. The events surrounding Maria Marten's death and William Corder's conviction left an impression that extended far beyond the courtroom, ensuring that the Red Barn murder would not be forgotten. Public fascination with the Red Barn murder didn't end with the trial. William Corder's execution in 1828 drew huge crowds, with broadsides recounting the crime reportedly selling over 1 million copies. That year alone, 200,000 visitors came to Polstead, many collecting souvenirs from the Red Barn, where Maria Marten's body was discovered. The barn became a morbid tourist destination, symbolizing betrayal and death. Sadly, the Red Barn burned down in 1842, leaving no physical trace of the crime. The case inspired a wave of commercial and artistic responses, with folk ballads, stage melodramas keeping the story alive throughout the 19th century. Today, a museum in Polstead displays macabre artifacts, including a bust of William Corder, a book bound in his skin, and the pistol used in the murder, items that continue to attract those fascinated by the dark history of the case. The Red Barn murder also inspired numerous films, plays, and documentaries, ensuring its place in popular culture. Its mix of betrayal, cunning, and tragic death remains a powerful draw, reflecting society's enduring fascination with stories that blur the lines between fact, fear, and folklore. Imagine a windswept prairie stretching endlessly under a vast, cloudless sky. The year is 1870, and the frontier of Kansas is a land of opportunity, a wild, untamed region where the promise of prosperity lured settlers from across the nation. But this vast openness, so full of potential, also concealed a terrifying secret. Hidden among the innocuous homesteads was a family whose name would become synonymous with horror: the Bloody Benders. The Bender family consisted of John Sr., a stoic and intimidating figure; Elvira, his wife, with a harsh and unfriendly demeanor; John Jr., their awkward and unsettling son; and Kate, the young, beautiful daughter who claimed to possess supernatural powers. Together, they presented themselves as ordinary pioneers, but behind their facade was a darkness that would leave a bloody stain on the history of the American frontier. Kansas, at the time, was a place where law was thin and justice was often delivered at the end of a gun barrel. It was a land where people vanished without a trace, where the isolation and lawlessness created the perfect conditions for the Benders to carry out their gruesome deeds. Their story is not just a tale of murder, but a chilling reminder of the dangers that lurk in the most unexpected places. The origins of the Bender family are clouded in mystery, with conflicting accounts of their past. It's believed that John Sr., whose real name might have been John Flickinger, was originally from Germany or the Netherlands, having emigrated to the United States before settling in Kansas. Elvira, also known as Almira Make, was rumored to have been married multiple times before, with some suggesting that she had killed several of her previous husbands. In 1870, the Benders arrived in Labette County, Kansas, and claimed a 160-acre plot of land under the Homestead Act. Their cabin was located along the Osage Trail, a route frequented by pioneers traveling westward. The Bender homestead, modest in appearance, included a small barn and garden, where they grew vegetables and tended a few animals. The cabin itself was divided into two sections. The front half served as a general store and inn, while the rear was the family's living quarters. The Benders quickly became known in the area, but they were regarded as an odd and reclusive family. John Sr. and John Jr. were seldom seen interacting with others, and when they did, their heavy German accents and strange behavior made them stand out. Elvira was particularly feared for her aggressive demeanor and was rumored to be involved in witchcraft. In contrast, Kate, who spoke English fluently and was known for her beauty and charm, was the most social member of the family, often engaging with visitors and offering her services as a spiritualist. The Benders were cunning in their selection of victims. They targeted travelers who were alone, especially those who appeared wealthy or were carrying valuable items. Kate played a pivotal role in luring these unsuspecting victims to their doom. She often advertised herself as a healer and spiritualist, promising to cure ailments or communicate with the dead. Her charm and allure drew in men, while her claims of spiritual powers attracted those in search of solace or answers. Once inside the Bender cabin, the trap was laid. The victim would be invited to sit at the head of the dining table, which was positioned near a canvas curtain that separated the front of the cabin from the back. As the guest enjoyed a meal or engaged in conversation with Kate, one of the Bender men would take position behind the curtain. At the right moment, they would strike the victim on the back of the head with a hammer, delivering a fatal blow. After the victim was incapacitated or killed, the family would drag the body to the trapdoor in the floor, which led to a small cellar beneath the cabin. There, the victim's throat was slit to ensure death, and the body was stripped of valuables. The remains were then buried in shallow graves in the orchard behind the cabin, their resting places marked only by the hastily turned soil. Over time, the orchard became a graveyard, its once fertile ground turned into a chilling testament to the Benders' brutality. By 1872, the disappearances of travelers on the Osage Trail were becoming too frequent to ignore. Concerned families and friends began to report the missing individuals to local authorities, who were slow to react, given the transient nature of the region's population. However, When Dr. William York, a well-known and respected physician, vanished while traveling from Fort Scott to Independence, the situation escalated. Dr. York's brothers, Colonel Ed York and Alexander York, were determined to find out what had happened. Colonel York, leading a group of armed men, retraced his brother's steps, visiting every homestead along the way. When they arrived at the Bender cabin in March 1873, the family was polite but evasive. Kate, ever the performer, offered to use her spiritual powers to help locate Dr. York, though her offer was met with skepticism. The Benders claimed they had seen Dr. York, but insisted he had continued on his journey. Despite the Benders' assurances, Colonel York remained suspicious. He returned to the Bender cabin a few weeks later, this time with a larger group of men. When questioned about other missing travelers, Elvira became enraged, accusing York of insulting her and her family. This reaction only fueled York's suspicions. Shortly afterward, the community organized a meeting at the nearby Harmony Grove schoolhouse, where it was decided that each homestead would be searched for evidence of the missing travelers. Before the search could commence, the Benders disappeared. Neighbors who visited the homestead found it deserted. The animals were unfed, the cabin empty, and the family nowhere to be found. The disappearance was too sudden, too complete, to be a coincidence. A search party was quickly formed, and when they arrived at the Bender property, they made a horrifying discovery. The search party began digging in the orchard behind the cabin, where they uncovered the shallow graves of multiple victims. The first body found was that of Dr. William York, his skull crushed and his throat slit. As they continued to dig, more bodies were found, each one bearing the same brutal injuries. In total, at least a dozen bodies were recovered, though some reports suggest there may have been as many as 21 victims. The Bender homestead, once a place of refuge for weary travelers, had become a site of unimaginable horror. The news of the Bender family's crimes spread rapidly, inciting outrage and fear across the region. The authorities, along with numerous vigilante groups, launched an intense manhunt to capture the Benders, but their efforts were in vain. The family had disappeared without a trace, leaving behind only the grisly evidence of their deeds. Search parties scoured the countryside, following every lead, but the Benders seemed to have vanished into thin air. As frustration mounted, so did the desire for retribution. The lawless nature of the frontier meant that many took justice into their own hands. Several innocent people, mistaken for members of the Bender family, were captured and lynched by angry mobs. However, these acts of vigilante justice did little to bring the real culprits to justice, and the whereabouts of the Bender family remained a mystery. Over the years, numerous sightings of individuals believed to be the Benders were reported in various parts of the country. Some claimed to have seen them in Texas, others in New Mexico, and there were even reports of them living under new identities in the East. In 1884, 2 women were arrested in Michigan on suspicion of being Kate and Elvira Bender, but they were released after a lack of evidence and conflicting testimonies. The Benders had become a ghostly presence, a symbol of the dangers of the frontier, forever haunting the American psyche. However, later came more mystery surrounding Katie's true identity, casts a long shadow over her legacy. Many wonder if she might have been the same Katie Bender who fled Kansas after the gruesome murders attributed to the infamous Bender family. Both women shared striking similarities. Born the same year, with auburn hair, hazel eyes, and a scarred left eye, married to reclusive German blacksmiths named John. The connection between her life in Kansas and her rise to prominence in Colorado remains speculative, though intriguing. Some believe Katie and John may have used their common surname to blend into the German immigrant community, hiding in plain sight while leaving behind a trail of blood in Kansas. Yet, there is little concrete evidence linking Colorado's Katie to the crimes. Instead, her life in Glenwood Springs was marked by public success and personal generosity, as she gave generously to her family and supported causes dedicated to family welfare. Could this have been a clever cover-up, a life built on the ruins of a dark past? Or was Katie simply a hard-working immigrant woman who overcame hardship to build a prosperous life in the American West? The truth, like Katie herself, remains elusive, leaving behind more questions than answers. The discovery of the Benders' crimes sent shockwaves through the community of Labette County. The once peaceful and close-knit society was now torn apart by fear and suspicion. Neighbors who had once trusted each other now looked with suspicion, wondering if the Benders had acted alone or if there were others like them still hiding in the community. The Bender homestead, once a place of hospitality for weary travelers, became a site of horror, abandoned and avoided by all. It stood as a grim reminder of the evil that had lurked in their midst. The land itself seemed tainted, as if the blood of the victims had seeped into the very soil, leaving behind a stain that could never be washed away. Some papers speculated that the Benders were part of a larger criminal network involved in everything from robbery to human trafficking. Others suggested that they were driven by a twisted sense of morality or religious fervor. The truth, however, was much simpler and more terrifying. The Benders were opportunists who saw in the isolation of the frontier a chance to satisfy their greed and cruelty. Over time, the story of the Bloody Benders entered American folklore. The family's cabin, long since destroyed, became a site of macabre fascination. Legends grew around the Benders, painting them as almost supernatural figures, agents of evil who preyed on the innocent. Their story has been the subject of countless books, documentaries, and even films, each one adding its own interpretation to the tale. Stories of haunted roads and ghostly apparitions near the old Bender property became part of the local lore, adding another layer to the chilling legacy of the Bloody Benders. Samuel Saville Kent, an inspector of factories, lived at Road Hill House with his second wife, Mary Drew Pratt, and their children. But this was a blended family, one marked by tension and whispers of scandal. Samuel's first wife, Mary Ann Windus, had died under suspicious circumstances in 1852, and just over a year later, he married the children's governess, Mary Pratt, fueling rumors of an affair before his first wife's death. By 1860, the Kent household was a mix of children from both marriages. Among them was Constance Kent, a 16-year-old girl deeply resentful of her stepmother. Her older sisters, Mary Ann and Elizabeth, were also part of the household, having grown up witnessing their father's tumultuous relationship with their late mother. William Kent, Constance's younger brother, was 14 at the time and had a close bond with his sister. The younger children from Samuel's second marriage, Mary Amelia, Eveline, and Ackland Saville, were still quite young. Each child in the household played a role in the complex family dynamics. On the morning of June 30th, 1860, the family's tranquility was shattered when 3-year-old Francis Saville Kent was discovered missing. Hours later, his tiny body was found stuffed into the vault of an outhouse, his throat slashed to the spine and a deep stab wound to his side. The brutal nature of the crime shocked the entire country. The night of June 29, 1860, seemed unremarkable. The household went to sleep as usual. The next morning, Elizabeth Goff noticed that Francis was missing from his cot. At first, she assumed his mother had taken him, but panic set in when he could not be found. A search of the property led to a gruesome discovery: Francis's lifeless body in the outdoor privy, wrapped in his blanket, his throat cut. The lack of forced entry suggested the killer was someone within the house. As the investigation unfolded, the once peaceful village of Rode was thrown into chaos, and all eyes turned to the Kent household. The family was immediately thrust under scrutiny. Samuel and Mary Kent, along with Francis's older half-siblings, became the subject of intense suspicion. But the question lingered: why would a member of the household commit such an unimaginable act? As the investigation progressed, attention shifted to the household staff, with particular focus on Elizabeth Goff, the nursemaid who had been entrusted with Francis's care. It was she who had put him to bed the night before, and her role in the child's final moments made her an obvious person of interest. Yet, the question remained: what motive could someone so trusted have for such a dreadful crime? Soon, suspicion turned to Constance Kent. A key piece of evidence was a missing nightdress. One of Constance's was never found. Authorities believed she had used it during the crime and later destroyed it. The local police were overwhelmed, leading to the arrival of Scotland Yard's top detective, Inspector Jonathan Witcher. Inspector Witcher, a pioneer in detective work, quickly honed in on Constance Kent. He believed she had waited until the house was asleep, taken Francis from his cot, and murdered him in the privy. However, his investigation was met with resistance. The wealthy Kent family, the magistrates, and even the press scorned his accusations, believing it inconceivable that a young woman of her status could commit such an atrocity. Without solid evidence, Witcher was forced to release Constance, and his reputation suffered. For years, the case remained unsolved. Then, in 1865, Constance, now living in a religious institution, made a shocking confession to Reverend Arthur Wagner. She admitted to the murder, claiming she had acted alone, driven by resentment toward her stepmother. But doubts lingered. Was she protecting someone? Her brother William was also suspected of involvement, though never charged. Constance was sentenced to death, but Queen Victoria commuted her sentence to life in prison. She served 20 years before being released in 1885. The Rode Hill House murder was more than just a crime. It was a scandal that exposed class biases, police incompetence, and the rigid moral codes of Victorian society. But even after Constance's confession, questions remained. Many believed that her confession had been coerced, possibly by Reverend Wagner, who had strong religious influence over her. Others speculated that she was covering for her brother William, who had been home from school at the time of the murder and had a close relationship with Constance. Some theorists even suggested that Samuel Kent himself, the patriarch of the family, may have played a role in either covering up the crime or manipulating Constance into taking the blame. After her release, Constance left England and reinvented herself in Australia, becoming a respected nurse under a new name, Emily Kay. She lived to the age of 100, but even in her final years, she never fully revealed the truth about that fateful night. Was she a cold-blooded child killer, or a victim of Victorian societal pressures and a deeply dysfunctional family? The Rode Hill House murder remains one of the most debated cases in true crime history. It not only shaped early detective work, but also influenced literature, inspiring characters like Charles Dickens' Inspector Bucket from Bleak House and later crime fiction. This case forces us to question the nature of justice. Did Constance really act alone, or was she a scapegoat for a much darker family secret? Today, Road Hill House, now known as Langham House, still stands in the quiet village of Road, Wiltshire. Though it remains a private residence, its dark past continues to intrigue true crime enthusiasts and historians alike. Over the years, the house has changed hands multiple times, with various owners renovating and modernizing the property while preserving its historic character. Despite its picturesque appearance, the chilling events of 1860 linger in public memory, making it one of England's most infamous crime scenes. Unlike the tumultuous years following the murder, the house now serves as a peaceful family home, far removed from the scrutiny and scandal that once surrounded it. While no public tours or official historical markers commemorate the tragic events, Road Hill House remains a site of deep fascination. Some believe the house still carries the echoes of its troubled past, while others see it simply as an old estate with a once notorious history, now reclaimed by time and new occupants. Thanks so much for watching. If you're enjoying this video and want to see more, consider supporting us on Patreon, and you'll get access to exclusive content and more. Just head over to Patreon and click the link in the description to join the community. Thanks again, and we'll see you in the next episode.